The cladding scandal has seriously dented the housing market, and it's a total disaster for thousands of people who bought flats in good faith and now can't sell or remortgage them. In Scotland, the government's going to do all the checking and pay for all the remedial work, and that starts next month, a big contrast to what's happening in England. Melanie Abbott's been looking into it for us. So Mel, this cladding problem then, is it the same wherever you live in the UK?
Well, it seems to be, because cladding's been used on lots of recent buildings, offices, hospitals, and of course flats. At first, it seems Scotland didn't have much of a problem, but it turns out that that wasn't true. Some local council records just weren't accurate. Now the Scottish Government's organising its own assessments, as you said, and it will pay for any work needed according to the risk. And it estimates there are 774 high-rise buildings, and that equates to just over 46,000 flats.
What happens in England?
In England, building owners have to organise these assessments, and they usually claw back the cost of them from the leaseholders who bought the flats. And then you apply for money from a pot called the Building Safety Fund, which was set up to pay for the cladding to be removed, set up by the government. All of this does take a long time. Not everyone's eligible. Campaigners and some MPs from all parties say it's all a bit of a mess.
How can the Scottish Government then afford to just pay for it all?
Well, that's a good question, and there are lots of unanswered questions about this, not least where that money is going to come from. The Scottish Government says funding could be confirmed as soon as August. It's got £1 million from that Building Safety Fund I mentioned. It is waiting to hear what more it's going to get. The other big question is how long all of this will take. Dangerous ACM cladding caused the Grenfell fire, of course, and that was 4 years ago now. Lisa Murray owns a flat in Glasgow. She told me she was initially told everything was okay.
I have an email from Glasgow City Council saying, no, you're fine, there is no ACM on your building. Sadly, 2 weeks later, we get the results from our cladding report, which suggests that we did have, sadly, combustible ACM like that in Grenfell, along with various other combustible rigid foam insulation behind ceramic tiles. It was incredibly worrying for us at that point. Everyone was just shocked.
The government has said that it is now going to do these assessments, and then it will repair buildings, replace cladding as needed according to the risk, and that it hopes that this will all be publicly funded. What do you think of this approach?
Whilst on the face of it, this is a fantastic approach, and I feel that it should be commended. However, this is 4 years since the Grenfell tragedy. We should have had all of these tests done by the government back then. You know, who decides what is most at risk at this point? You know, is it those that shout the loudest, or is it really that what is being built that's incorrect and should be fixed immediately? And if that is the case, why haven't they fixed it before now?
And of course, while people wait, they're still living in potentially dangerous flats. Abhijit Kadwe owns a 2-bedroom flat with flammable cladding similar to that on the Grenfell Tower. He's in Glasgow too. It also has flammable expanded polystyrene insulation. He's worried about his safety, but he is glad the Scottish Government's getting involved.
It is a good thing, and I'm quite happy with that approach. That would lead to a more comprehensive resolution. But what it does not address is that, the fire safety issues that we are having at the moment. So it completely, ignores that aspect. We have been told that in July, there would be surveys taking place, but we still don't know who will be carrying out the survey. We haven't got any response back yet. I really hope and pray that the government does something about it, and soon.
Why has the Scottish Government taken this very different approach?
The Scottish system of flat ownership's really different from England. Instead of a building owner or a freeholder, the flat owners co-own all of the common areas, and they must agree about any decisions. So maybe that's it. The SNP government looked to Australia for the way to handle dangerous cladding. There, only the highest risk buildings have had the cladding removed and replaced. Chris Ashurst, he represented flat owners on a Scottish government task force, and he told me he thinks what they're going to do now is best.
That will enable them, if you like, to triage the buildings into those that are at high risk, those that maybe have some risk, and those that are okay. Then further decisions can be made. If you like, the car is on the road, it's going somewhere, but it's quite a long road.
Is this a better system than what's happening in England with people just applying individually to the Building Safety Fund?
Personally, I think it is. And the idea at the end of the day is that that will provide for every building in Scotland a home certificate. When you move into a new house, you will have a certificate saying, this is how it's been built, this is how it is safe. Big issue was to discover the size of the problem and then work on the costs. And the costs can be amazing. So we have one building in Scotland which is under remediation at the minute at the cost, as it happens, of the builder, but the costs for that one development are in excess of £30 million.
In the meantime, Mel, the market for new flats across the UK has just stalled, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. It's a really big problem. People are now putting up flats for auction with risky cladding because it's just so hard to sell them in any other way. The campaign group, the Leasehold Knowledge Partnership, did some research on this in England and found that in more than 100 blocks with known fire safety defects, almost half had flats which were put up for auction in the last 18 months. If they sell, and more than 1 in 10 don't, they're going for a song. Only 6% sold above the original purchase price. Lucy Brown worked on that research.
When we looked at some buildings in Liverpool, for example, I can think of one that's it's an award-winning development. It looks like a beautiful home. There was a 2-bedroom flat there that was purchased for, I believe it was £135,000, and that was back in 2008. And then it sold at auction for $57,000. These homes were bought in, 2001, 2002. So you would expect quite a significant appreciation, but they may have only sold for, say, 2% above the original purchase price.
What do you think is going to be the effect on the housing market overall, if any?
I think it can potentially be quite serious, potentially systemically as well for the banks. People are looking at this sort of in isolation, thinking this is just a small handful of flats, but it's not. It's hundreds of thousands of flats. Typically in any purchase, there's a chain. So if one flat can't go unsold, the whole chain can collapse.
And many people are selling because they face bankruptcy. Lucy Brown says flat owners in England can't afford to make their flats safe.
We found that on average, it would take about 3 years worth of total disposable income to pay for the average remediation bill. That means somebody taking no holidays, no meals out, not buying any toys for their children, anything like that. That means devoting every single penny towards the remediation bill.
And does that take into account any money that may be obtained from the Building Safety Fund?
The Building Safety Fund only applies to buildings over 18 meters, and it only will give grants for cladding because the majority of buildings impacted are under 18 meters, and the cladding actually typically accounts for less than half of the fire safety defect costs.
The Westminster government, in a statement, told me this: our approach strikes the right balance in protecting leaseholders and being fair to taxpayers while restoring confidence in this section of the housing market.
And what's happening with cladding in Wales and Northern Ireland?
Well, in Wales, they've set aside £42 million of public money for cladding and other defects, and they expect at least some of this to come from the Westminster pot. Wales plans to set up a building inspection team in the autumn and then announce how the money is going to be spent. Northern Ireland hopes the problem's not so bad there. They've so far found no public housing blocks which have ACM cladding.
Melanie Abbott, thank you.